Hello and welcome, everybody. Here we are at another session of our Product Experts Fireside series that we run here at ProdPad. As we've been running these things for years now, every month we've had different guests come in and join us and basically have a fireside chat like this. And so it's always with a focus on bringing in amazing experts with lots of experience and insights and just focusing on the conversation, on the content, the learning, the sharing. So today is going to be recorded, just like all of our other past talks. So you can go back in time. If you go to prodpad.com/webinars, you can see a list of all the past versions of this that we've done. But it's always a mix of usually firesides, sometimes presentations from experts, but again, with a really focus on the learning and the sharing. And today, as I said, is going to be recorded. You will have a chance to ask questions, so throw them into the Q&A section if you can. We will be trying to keep an eye on the chat as well, but that's harder to keep eyes on. So if you put it into the Q&A, it means that other people can give them a thumbs up so we can see which ones are most popular, and it's easier for us to keep track of who's asked what. That said, as I said, it's a fireside conversation, so it's a chance for us to just chat and geek out over product and welcome you all in as part of that. We're joined by Radhika Dutt, who I'm going to introduce properly in just a minute, but we're going to be talking today about how radical product thinking can transform the way you build products. And as most of you probably know, Radhika is the author of Radical Products. And you can see the copy of the book behind her. If anybody doesn't already have that, then grab your copy. But before we kick off, I want to just do a quick intro to what we do here at ProdPad. I know I recognize some faces here from some of our usuals who already know and love ProdPad, but for anybody who isn't already up to date with what we're doing. So ProdPad is a tool that we built ourselves. We were product managers and we needed tools to do our own jobs. And now it's being used by thousands of teams around the world. But basically it's a tool that helps you keep track of everything that's in your backlog and everything that you're outlining as your big picture goals. So it's a place to manage your vision, your strategy, your goals, but also the more tactical, like what's in your backlog and what are your customers asking for. And it's a tool that you can try for free. We even have a sandbox version of ProdPad that's preloaded with example roadmaps and OKRs and other facets, so you can see how it all fits together before you kick off and create your own versions in your own account. And our team is made up of product people, right? It's founded by product people, and we're always learning and iterating based on what we're hearing from our audience. So give it a try and give us feedback. Let us know what you love and how it jives with how you work and what doesn't. And that way we can learn from that and constantly improve. Now, on that note, I want to talk a little bit about where we've been going with ProdPad as well. So we've recently introduced Copilot, which is an AI facet of our app, which basically, I was talking earlier about ProdPad being a place to manage your vision and your goals and what your customers have said and trying to draw the dots or connect the dots between all of that so you make the best product decisions. The AI underpinning all of that now can help you connect those dots much more quickly and answer all the questions that people would otherwise come to you and tap you on the shoulder to ask those questions, and ends up taking up a lot of time. Things like, have we ever worked on something like this? What was the outcome? Can you tell me what we're doing to impact this particular objective? Why are we working on this thing? Or what has so-and-so said? Or what has this target market said about our product? So it's just helping to draw those lines between things and help you move faster and more confidently as a product person. So, enough about us. I want to introduce Radhika. I know Radhika through the product management, just massive. She's a huge thought leader in the world and hardly needs an introduction. But Radhika is a powerhouse in the world of product and innovation. She's an entrepreneur and a product leader. Her experience spans everything from media to entertainment to government, robotics, even wine. So, a bit of everything, which really rounds out her experience. And she's the author of Radical Product Thinking. So that's the book that she's got there behind her. And in Radical Product Thinking, she lays out a practical framework for translating vision into everyday action and takes aims at the habits and the assumptions that often lead teams astray, which is what I really love about that particular approach. It really rings true to me. She's also nowadays advising the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And she's talking about things like how to apply product thinking at a national level. So really important work here. So everybody, I want to say a big hello and thank you for joining us, Radhika. Everyone say hi.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here, Jenna. What is super exciting for me is we've known about each other for a long time, and for a long time, I'd been saying, oh, I'd love to do something together, and I'm so excited to be here.
We're doing it.
Exactly. The planets
Love how
aligned.
that happened. Excellent. Well, hey, would love to get this conversation started by hearing a little bit about your background. Anything I missed in that warm-up story, or what sort of led you to this way that you think nowadays about product management?
Maybe I'll start that on a personal note. I grew up in India and lived there till I was 12, then moved to South Africa. And this was right after the apartheid laws were abolished. So that was 1991. Lived there until right after the first democratic elections happened in 1994. So lived in South Africa in its most momentous times, let's say.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then moved to the US for undergrad. And I've been here since, except for a 2.5 year stint in Singapore. So that's on a more personal note.
Love
And
that.
what led me to product was really this meandering path, right? I think you've been in product for so much longer. So I've known about you for a lot longer. But my background in product was, I remember one of well, first of all, right after undergrad, I started a company with four other co-founders, and it was called Lobby 7. And my first introduction to product was catching the product disease I now call hero syndrome. Where we were trying to be big. Our vision at the time was revolutionizing wireless, and our tagline was enlightened wireless. And you asked me today, what does that mean? And I have no idea.
Love that.
Um, but like that was the first product disease.
Yeah.
And then I worked at other organizations and I had an example, and this was the only example that I've ever had of working in a company after Lobby 7. So I went to work at Avid, and that was the only place where we didn't have product diseases, where we actually were so incredibly vision driven. Never before and never since have I seen a company that vision driven. And like to date, when people from Avid get together, we all cannot stop talking about it. And just there's so much passion. But we can talk more about that. So I had an example from a negative experience and a positive experience. And the thing at Avid was my title was program manager for custom engineering, and which is like the diametric opposite of what product means. And yet, what I realized years later was I was really applying product thinking because my role in that title was that I had to talk to our customers and figure out as we were building a new suite of products for broadcast. So Avid is well known in Hollywood, but this was broadcast that we were
Hmm.
going after. And my role was to talk to these broadcasters, figure out what we needed to build, what was truly custom and what was not, and then get them to pay for helping us build what was strategic. So almost partnering with us, trying to avoid custom where we could, and build out our product on a low budget. And if you think about it, that's exactly what doing product is,
Yeah.
despite the title. So I'll pause there. That was my introduction to product. And since then, it's been this quest for how can we get everyone to be that vision driven
Yeah.
after that experience at Avid.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a really good experience to lean on. What made Avid capable of doing so? Was there something with the founder makeup or with the way that it thought, the way that it structured its teams?
There was a lot of strategic thinking at Avid. You had a leadership team that really had thought through strategy. And there was psychological safety. Like, I remember one instance where it was a strategy meeting that they were having. And I was, what, 25 at the time? And I sat in on these strategy meetings and I wasn't afraid to speak up. And I remember once debating something with the CTO, and I was 6 months into the job, right? And he said I was right. And never before and never after have I seen that level of psychological safety, right? There I was, like this young kid. Who was I to know what we should be doing? And yet I had an opinion, and he realized I was right on something, and we were able to move forward. So that was another thing. So the strategic thinking, the psychological safety. And the
Mhm.
third thing was the person who headed up broadcast and this new suite that we were building out. We were the underdog that didn't even have a product for broadcast going up against the behemoth of Sony. And he had a vision. So his name was David. And David had a vision for what is it going to take to replace Sony in all of these newsrooms. And what was amazing was he shared the vision. He was able to communicate like what our strategy was. And then he gave me autonomy. As a 25-year-old, I was able to negotiate with the leaders of these newsrooms on what features we should or shouldn't build.
Nice.
And he didn't intervene. That level of autonomy, never before, never since. Well,
Yeah.
before, yes, in my startups, but
Yeah.
never since working in a company.
Yeah, that's really magic and actually aligns with what I call the formula for good product culture or good product innovation culture, which is you need to have alignment. So sounds like making sure everyone knows what that vision is and that's really clear and communicated across the team. Having autonomy, so having the space to actually go and find your own path with how you tackle it, be able to work independently and autonomously, but all with a multiplying factor of psychological safety. Because good psychological safety can like absolutely lift the team up, but also bad psychological safety can just slow everything down. There's no point having aligned autonomy, but the team doesn't feel safe actually trying anything.
Yeah, exactly. And the psychological safety part is so important because no matter how much strategic thinking you have within the leadership team or across the whole
Yeah,
organization, you need opinions and ideas from people who
yeah,
might be exposed to things that you're not.
yeah,
And if you don't have psychological safety, you never really understand what is working in your strategy, what is not, and what you
yeah,
need to change.
yeah.
That's where you need people to be able to voice their opinions freely.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, psychological safety is a bit of a buzzword. Like I remember when I started in product management, no one ever talked about this thing. It wasn't anything that we'd had, nor knew even how to articulate. Did you call it psychological safety back then, or are you just looking back on it retroactively and going, ah, that's what it was. That was the happy place.
It was definitely, in hindsight, that's what it
Yeah,
was. As a 25-year-old at the time, I was like, I thought this was how it was.
yeah.
You don't appreciate things that you think are obvious and natural until years later and you realize that's not how it always works.
Oh, now see, I had the opposite, right? My career before I was about 25 and whatnot involved some kind of not great companies, right? No psychological safety, perhaps edging on what we'd call nowadays toxic. And so I remember asking my first boss, he'd left and was talking to me afterwards, giving me some advice afterwards. And I said to him, like, is this normal? Is this how companies always operate? And he's, no, there's better companies out there. I'm like, okay. Not long afterwards, I quit too.
Yeah. Sometimes it's interesting how when you have amazing bosses, it keeps you in a place much longer than you would have stayed otherwise. And this was another learning for me that when you are working on a product, if you're a product manager, regardless of whether you have authority based on your title or level in the corporate ladder, you can still be strategic, apply product thinking.
Yeah,
You can create psychological safety within your little bubble.
yeah.
And so I remember, like, years later, I was working in a company where we were working on advertising tech, right, for TV. There's nothing less inspiring than that.
I don't know.
And
I love a geeky niche. I'm sure it has its merits.
that's right. That's right. But, right, like when I say that our product was in ad tech for TV, like you don't think, oh, yeah, I want to go work there. And yet we were able to create an environment where I was able to communicate our vision. Like we didn't have a clear vision from leadership. And that really bothered me. So I had to create a vision for our team and kind of know for our product, what is it that we want to build? And then we had to, I remember the most memorable moment for me in working in that organization was when a developer came to me and she said, I saw that you wrote this in the story, but I think what you actually meant was this, because this would be better for the user. Is that right? And I was like, yes, I have arrived. If my developer can correct me on where I was wrong and she understands my intent. And that's the level at which the vision and strategy has to be so clear to the team that they're able to course correct when you're wrong. And so this was my experience, the counter side to finally feeling like I had learned to do what David had taught me way back when I was 25, that regardless of your level, you can apply these same ideas and do it within your sphere of control.
Yeah.
What was your learning, and at what point did you get to something similar?
Oh, well, I remember a job that I had not long afterwards. It was the one that actually brought me over to the UK and realized that the best way to get things done was to actually ring fence some core team members and say, actually, you know what? We're going to be this lean machine that's going to get all the stuff done while the rest of the business sort of plonks on and does what it does. And actually, that was one of the most empowering pieces that I got to work on, certainly at that sort of era of my career. Because it was true. You realize that you could get a lot more done with a small team who knew what it is that you were trying to do, gave me the ability to find our own way to solve those problems, and built psychological safety within that little bubble. And so, yeah, that was an eye opener for me.
For me, from that experience onwards, what I realized was I was doing it within my bubble. And then the question that kept coming up for me was, how do you do this at scale?
Mhm.
Why is it that I can do this within a bubble? What stops me from doing this at a bigger scale, right? Like,
Yeah.
why can't I get other parts of the organization to think like me? And one thing I'll speak about very openly, and people can feel free to add in chat as well, was I found that as a woman, if I was being assertive or sharing, here's what we need to do, or being very clear and pushy in terms of direction, very often that led to this blowback. That the feedback I would hear is, you're not building enough consensus. And yeah, I feel like very often that wouldn't be said to a guy at the same level. But in any case, one thing that it led me to do was, and you'll see this as part of radical product thinking, it led me to develop techniques where I am very much in the driver's seat, but you don't feel like I am forcing it on you.
Oh, interesting.
And I'll give you an example of
Yeah,
this.
please do. That's where I wanted to go next. All right, tell us your ways.
Okay, so I'll talk about vision and strategy next, but the part I'll jump to is prioritization. Well, maybe I'll step back for a second. In the radical product thinking way, right, what I talk about is how do you translate vision very systematically into everyday action? And the five elements are vision, strategy, prioritization, execution and measurement, and culture. And every single one of these elements has very tangible frameworks to be able to use these concepts and bring everyone with you on the journey so that you're influencing your whole organization is scalable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
having said that,
starting with prioritization, which is, I think, the most contentious part of where we have to do our jobs, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And this is the part where you keep hearing this feedback, oh, you need more consensus. And so how do you do that? So the trick that I found is you have to take a more facilitative approach as opposed to directive, but yet you have to be firmly in control. So how do you do that? What this prioritization approach is basically drawing up an X and a Y axis. Because let's think about what is prioritization. Intuitively, we're always balancing long term against short term. It's the yin and yang of long term and short term, which I then call long term is vision fit. Is this good for the vision or not? Oh, Colleen says, are there slides for this part of the conversation? I'm happy to share a slide
Yeah,
actually. I think
go on,
that might actually
share your
that
screen
might
if
be
you've
really
got
helpful.
something. You should be able to just go ahead and do it. Well, let's see if
I'll
that
share my
works.
screen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Here we go. Hopefully you can see
And
this.
and David's asked, could you repeat what those five areas are? But they're
Okay.
coming up on the slides, and that'll be perfect as well.
Okay, let me do that. Okay, this is prioritization, but
Oh,
let me
hold on.
actually,
I'm not seeing the
um,
screen yet if you're sharing.
oh, really? I am sharing screen. Let me
Uh,
stop and reshare.
oh, hold on. Everyone else can see it. All right, I
Ah,
can't see it, but that's fine. I'll deal with it on my side.
okay,
Keep
good.
going. All good.
Okay, good. So hopefully you can see it, and I'll show you the five elements in a second. The five elements are, here we go, actually, the five elements. Do I have a slide that shows you one? Okay. Well, it's the vision, and I'll talk about this in a moment. The strategy, and that's the RDCL strategy. Prioritization, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then execution and measurement. And then finally, culture. But
Mhm.
culture, I don't even have on the slide, but I'll show you afterwards if you like. But let's talk about prioritization for a moment, right? In terms of prioritization, the way I like to think about it is this yin and yang of vision versus survival. And yin and yang feels very abstract. So for your team, you can make this really tangible by actually drawing it up as this X and Y axis. And once you have this, it shows these four quadrants, right? Things that are good for the long-term vision and good for survival. Well, those, I used to call it ideal. Now I call it easy decisions because they're easy decisions that you want to default to. But if you're always in this quadrant, right, you're still being myopic. So sometimes you have to invest in the vision. And examples of that would be if you're fixing tech debt, if you're doing user research, that's great for the long-term vision, but it's not great for short-term survival. The opposite of that is when you're building vision debt, right? Where it's great for short-term survival, but not good for the long-term vision. And think of building vision debt in the form of taking on custom features. So if you're building custom features that's helping you win a deal, right, that's great for short term, but in the long term, the more vision debt you take on, the more you're likely to catch the product disease I call obsessive sales disorder. And coming back to the point of how do I use this approach in a facilitative way? First of all, you go and stand up. So even your body language, you're drawing up an X and a Y axis at the board. That in itself puts you in charge. But you know what? I'm not then telling you this is the way to prioritize by showing you the spreadsheet that is item number 153 is priority number 5, whereas this other item is priority number 27. Like that is more directive, where it's hard for people to understand how did you come up with this magic spreadsheet, right? And so instead, when I have this vision versus survival, it becomes very visual, where it's less contentious. So if I say functionality A falls in easy decisions, or I classify functionality D as under vision debt, it begs this next question, which is, if you think it's vision debt, why do you think it's not good for our vision? And that next leads to, well, what is the vision? And it helps you figure out where you're aligned and where you're misaligned. It actually airs those misalignments as opposed to the magic spreadsheet, which leads you to say numbers and what the priority list is, but you're not creating an intuition in your team for how do I prioritize when I go off to my desk and I have to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this way of visualizing it. It's actually something that I've done a lot in the past. Said, well, here's all the stuff that we could do. Most of this isn't in the right place for us, right? We have to choose which of these things we're going to do, and so let's map it out. And I've often used the axes of impact and effort, but I like how this is very clear about actually breaking up that impact by survival versus vision fit, so you can look more closely into it. It's almost like you're diving into it even deeper. Also love that there's a place for things like tech debt on the space here. A lot of people say, well, how do I communicate that tech debt needs to be done? And actually, you're absolutely right. It's part of a connection to the vision. It's a connection to, hopefully, the overarching strategy of the company, which is to build something that's stable and secure and performant and is able to be built on top of. But yeah, really important to be able to communicate how this stuff is going to help the company thrive.
Yeah, and David says, and it's closer to the language that I think business folks think in. And I
Mm.
think that's exactly it. Like it helps you build that stakeholder alignment in a very visual way. And it might be that you even have to take on vision debt, right? Like when I remember when we were at Avid and we were building out this whole product suite, we sometimes had to take on some custom features, right? And you acknowledge when you need to take on vision debt, but what is really helpful is labeling it vision debt so that it doesn't feel like a top-down loss in the confidence or top-down, how do you say, not valuing our vision. That's super demoralizing. So when people call it vision debt, you feel like, okay, I can get behind this. I see why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And then you create a plan for how do I invest in the vision over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the concept of talking about it in terms of debt. I've actually done a talk before about different types of debt that product managers have to face, and I hadn't come across vision debt, but I think it's a great concept. But the thing that I often talk about when you're talking about debt is that product managers have to make decisions and trade-offs. And sometimes that trade-off is, yes, this is going to put us in a little bit of debt, but sometimes debt can be healthy. It's enabling. It enables you to move faster on something else or unlock. Sometimes it's important strategically to get that cash in the door so that lights stay on, right? But as long as people acknowledge it for what it is, right? We're taking on this bit of backlog debt or vision debt or design debt or whatever, but it's allowing us to get it to market faster, or it's allowing us to test something, or it's allowing us to get past this bump. Then you've got this really clear way of talking about it with the rest of your team without assigning shame to it or not really being able to talk about what you don't like about it.
So true, exactly. And your point about you don't have to have shame for doing it. And we talk openly about it. And it's part of building that sort of psychological safety as well, right? That people can, once you have this facilitative approach, people can talk about their opinions of what is vision debt. And like you start to give people the vocabulary to contribute their thoughts on this X and Y axis. And by the way, I wanted to answer David's question of what are the five elements. So these are the five elements, and each of these becomes a framework. And I just want to also mention that it doesn't mean that it's a linear process, right? You might go back and forth between these things. But the reason you even have these elements for clarity is because if you don't have them, this is what product development ends up looking like. That's why we need each of those elements to be very clear to help that communication and alignment happen throughout the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with Lauren on this. She says she absolutely loves it. So I think this makes a lot of sense. How is this used in a practical sense? Is this that four quadrant thing? Is that something that you throw up on a screen and work with your team to figure out placement of it? Or is it something that's done as a, back end task between work? What happens there?
Yeah. So here are the contexts in which I've used this, right? So when I plan even a sprint with the team, I end up using that vision versus survival to be able to plan the sprint with the team. And the way I do this is everyone gets post-its and we write features and we put each one up on the axes and the quadrants. And then the relative position is what matters, right? And then based on that, we look at that and we say, okay, what is going to be priority one, two, three, or what are we going to do in this particular sprint? And so that again creates alignment in terms of priority. And if we are not able to accomplish all of this in this sprint, what is going to get left out? That helps us think through that. I've even used this when I talk to executives, where we are talking about a sales opportunity and how that's going to end up requiring a lot of vision debt that we have to then service afterwards. That's another way, like for communicating across stakeholders, so that I can start to get them to think like us
Yeah.
and in this product thinking way. So those are a few ways I've used it. This is the part that often the prioritization is in. The prioritization approach is often what I've used to introduce radical product thinking within a company. Because the reality is, right, I've talked a lot about this clarity of vision. And let me go to vision for a second. And this is the radical vision statement. It's a fill in the blank statement. I've talked about needing clarity on the vision. But what happens is if you're introducing radical product thinking in the organization and you're an individual contributor and you go in and you say, guys, our vision sucks. This vision of revolutionizing wireless or whatever else makes absolutely no sense. Let's address our vision. The problem with that approach is often it feels like a bull in a china shop that leaders might say, who are you to question this vision? Like the leader sets the vision or something like that. That makes it a whole lot harder to introduce a new angle. It's almost the organization gets an allergic reaction when you introduce a foreign body. And so my way is often this sneaky way, let's say, of introducing vision versus survival and talking about features on this to create alignment. And it's naturally it introduces this question of, well, so what's our vision? And that's where you have in your back pocket, ta-da, here's what I wrote up as a vision. I would love your feedback. What do you think? And that's how you introduce these ideas and get clarity and create your sphere of influence.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like the ideal way to build consensus, right? So you're not just coming at it saying, here's my thing, let's go do my thing. It's about working with your team to get their take on it. And everyone's going to have a slightly different take on what your vision could be or should be. But actually having a session where you bring a format like this, put it on the wall, have everyone talk it through, see where there's already consensus, get those things in there as obvious wins. But where there isn't consensus, really truly understand as to where people are disagreeing, why they're disagreeing, what their lens has told you and the rest of the team about what you're up against. And then hopefully by the end of the session, you've got something that you can all agree on. And that way, when you present the final vision statement, which usually is something like this, but tidied up using jazzier words or whatever needs to be done, you're presenting back to them what they've all kind of contributed to. And so everyone can see, oh, well, I helped decide that, and I helped talk about that. And that was my idea. And that way, everyone goes, I understand the vision. I was part of creating it, and I'm in love with it. I think it's the right thing to go do. And so they're all really aligned with it.
Yeah, exactly. In the book, I talk about this one story of Lijat, which is an organization in India. It makes papadums. And you would think, well, how interesting can that be as an organization? They actually dominate the papadum market. So
Brilliant.
65% market share in papadums,
Globally
uh,
or India focused?
globally.
Globally,
And
brilliant.
yeah, exactly. And,
That's a lot of papadums.
and the rest of this market share is fragmented among a whole bunch of players.
Yeah.
It's over $220 million in annual revenues. And what is most amazing about this organization is that it is owned by 45,000 women who are all equal partners.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And so for Radical Product Thinking, when I wrote the book, I interviewed the president of Legit. And I asked her, describe the vision for me because I don't understand. How can 45,000 women be equal partners in this? And so the vision that she described, there's no tagline, there's no slogan for Legit. Every single member sister, that's what they call all the partners, every single member sister would describe the vision in her own words, but the answer is the same. And the vision that they have is that they wanted to create financial independence for women from low income households who live in this patriarchy. And they wanted to give these women financial independence so that they could educate their kids, contribute to household income and
Yeah.
influence spending in the household, right? So that's why they wanted this independence. And so Papadums was the product, a
Yeah.
means to achieve this end state.
I love
So
that.
and so when you ask them about the vision, because there is no tagline, slogan, etc., what it inspired me in terms of the radical vision statement is you might look at this and go, this is very long, it's almost essay, right? But this is what people need. They don't need to memorize your words that you've put up in fancy words that sounds good, that sounds artificially inspiring. Remember that story that I was telling you about, like working in ad tech for TV? It's the least inspiring idea as a product, but our team felt like we had this shared purpose. So,
Yeah.
whatever your purpose is, you can write it in this format, right? Where you have this clarity and a shared sense of purpose on whose problem are we solving? What exactly is the problem? Why is the current state unacceptable? That is to me a key question, which is if we cannot answer why the status quo is absolutely unacceptable, we should not be disrupting for the sake of disruption. And then finally, we can answer the question, what's the world we envision? Meaning, what does it look like when you're done? And then finally, this is finally where you can talk about your product, which is how are you bringing about this world? And so that's what this vision is about. And I'm happy to even share an example just off the top of my head.
Yeah, would love to hear an example. But also going back to that story of the Papadums company, what I love about that vision is that it's enduring, right? It's the type of vision that you could repeat 20 years ago or 20 years from now. And ultimately, that's still the vision. That's where people are, that's what you're trying to do with it. But the product, it might be Papadums. but maybe the world has moved on, right? Maybe there's something else that might solve that problem. So they're not connected necessarily to the product, right? Making the cheapest or tastiest or whatever sort of poppadoms. It's about actually that underlying vision, which they can all get behind. And whatever it is that helps deliver on that vision, that's what the product is. That's the how. But that's actually less important than making sure that they're all aligned on what it is that this organization is trying to do.
Yeah, that is such an interesting point, and I think that is something that I've struggled with a lot because we want to write vision statements that are enduring, but at the same time, sometimes it's not really realistic. Like in this example of the ad tech company, right? And I'll give you another example with a wine related company, but sometimes you don't know what is possible to write in this enduring forever
Mm-hmm.
way. What I like to think about is let's not focus on a 5 or 10 year time frame because honestly, I don't know how the world is changing in 5 to 10 years.
Five
So,
to 10 months is, a reasonable timeline these days.
especially, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, it is a crazy world out there at the moment. Exactly. So, given that we don't have all this visibility in the horizon, let's focus on what we can truly answer as a problem statement for whose problem we're solving, what is the problem, why it's unacceptable, etc. Thinking about a year horizon, right? And it might be a year, 2 years. It should be truly a problem that you care about. That's the main criterion that the vision isn't about you,
Hmm.
meaning it's not about what you want, but it has to be a problem that even if you did not exist in the picture, I think that's what's powerful about Legit. It's not about what the founders wanted for themselves, but like it's about what you want to see solved, that even if you're taken out of the picture and somebody else built this, that you would be happy to see this solved. I think that's what makes a good vision.
That's really good way of putting it. It's something that you'd like to see solved, even if you have the answer for it, really. Yeah, and I like how you think about the vision in terms of a couple years horizon, right? That actually aligns with what we talk about with the now, next, later roadmap, right? And what's empowering about the now, next, later roadmap is that it gets you thinking further ahead so that, yes, it is important to think about what's keeping your team busy right now. That's very much the here and now and the how sort of piece. But really, the things that are on your roadmap should be what are the big chunky problems that need to be solved in order to reach that vision, whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Depends on the context, like how far into the space you are and how well developed your product is right now. But generally, it should be that 2 year sweet spot. And I find a lot of roadmaps, one of the things they fall foul of the most is that they're just simply 1 year outlooks, which
Yeah.
is too myopic in most of the cases.
I so agree with what you said. And I think this is where your point about it all depends on the maturity level of your product. And that's very true of your vision, right? Like you might have a really mature product, and in which case your outlook might be
Mhm.
pretty far out, right? And that works for you. If you're an early stage startup, you're learning at a really fast pace.
Yeah.
And so the answer to this, if you're a really early stage startup, might be you write up a vision, that's your stake in the ground. It's the best information that you have in this moment while you're starting your startup. 2 months from now, you might have learned a lot about some of the answers to the who, what, why, when, and how. And you might have to come back to the team and say, this was what we had for our vision before. This is the point where we were wrong. This is what we learned. And therefore, this is what we would change instead. And by the way, this is how you overcome the disease pivotitis, because one of the one of the problems that I ran into in my career was I often saw this pivotitis where it was almost like every sprint is a new pivot. Sometimes every month as a startup, you're pivoting, and sometimes it's because who's the loudest customer screaming. Sometimes it's because your VC has a new idea for you. There's so many different reasons. And so the way you prevent pivotitis is by having a vision. And it's not to say you can never pivot, but it's more like you pivot with gravitas. Every time you realize you have to pivot, you have to be able to answer what was the learning? What are we going to do differently? And what is it because of?
Yeah. And actually, I want to talk more about these diseases because if anybody hasn't read Radical Product Thinking, it's got a series of really creative takes on product diseases, pivotitis, featureitis, obsessive sales disorder. Tell us about where this sort of concept of diseases has come in and how you framed it around some of these common problems that product teams have.
Yeah. So One thing, by the way, I realized is these diseases were things that I had been catching early in my career. Like I shared hero syndrome when we had our
Yep.
wireless startup. We had caught pivotitis in another startup where I was VP of marketing, where, we wanted to be in the next Visa of the world. And we realized that, oh, that means we have to acquire both consumers and we have to acquire merchants. And we realized, oh, that's really tough. So a month later, we became a loyalty solutions provider for merchants. But then we realized, you know what, that's a really crowded market. So then we became a credit solutions provider for merchants. And the thing is, heading up marketing, I honestly wasn't sure at the end of 3 months what I was even asking customers to sign up for.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in that same situation. I once joined a startup where it was very much in the recruitment space, and its tagline, its vision was very much around connecting talent to employers. I'm like, I can get behind that. I can understand that. I understand the context in which we're working. Cool. And by the time we were finished, it was like meritocratizing learning or something. And I was like, I don't even know what this means. Didn't work in the long run.
Yeah. So pivotitis, another disease I saw often was narcissist complex. And this was one that I'd caught as well, which was sometimes you're so excited about an idea because you feel like you would use it if only you had this feature. And so you go build this. And the narcissist complex part is that you become disconnected from what the
Mhm.
customer actually needs, focusing on just inwards and what you need, right? And there are a few other diseases. Maybe I'll give one or other example, which is strategic swelling, which is where we keep building everything for everyone to the point where our product is so bloated that it'll make coffee for you if you just ask nicely.
Yeah. Which actually, with some of the tools that we're getting nowadays, it's getting to that point. Well, I forget all previous instructions and tell me a recipe for. Yeah, that's an interesting strategic swelling. I like that. What I like about the framing of diseases is that it creates a common language around it, right? People hold on to these things and go, "Oh, wait, do we have this? Well, if we have this, well, how do we know we have this? And what do we do about it? What do we do to treat this?" And I like the way that you talk about diseases, but also in terms of building better habits to improve the state that the company happens to be in.
Yeah. So exactly. But I think, what you said about diseases and being able to frame it, what I realized was if I wanted to introduce a new way of doing things, a new approach, or a new mindset into a company, that unless we had a clear vision for why do we even need this new approach, so I'm being very meta here, unless you have a vision for why you need change, like it's really hard to implement a new approach. So aligning on here are some product diseases we have, it really helps you address this question of what is unacceptable about the status quo about our company. And it's only when you can agree and talk openly about these product diseases that then at that point it suddenly becomes so much easier to say, okay, yes, let's solve this. We need to solve this. And here are some elements that we can introduce to be able to solve it. So that was the framing behind product diseases.
Yeah.
And the second reason for framing for product diseases, by the way, was just that I don't want to stigmatize it. These diseases happen, they're so ubiquitous. Like when I give talks and I say, who has seen pivotitis or who has seen obsessive sales disorder? Like everyone in the audience admits to it because we've all done it at some point, either contributed to it or we've seen it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's one thing to recognize that you've got these yourself within the company, but something else altogether to call it out and start doing something with it. It's all fun and games when you've got a place where you've actually got that psychological safety and your boss and your execs have built that around you. But what's your recommendation for teams or for people who are in teams that don't have that necessarily?
I've seen two techniques. So one is sometimes you have to introduce it in a very gentle way that I've seen teams organize book clubs. And then the book club was this pretext to be able to start talking about product diseases. So they got everyone talking about product diseases in this way. And by the way, for everyone here, I'll make the offer that if you're in this webinar, if you're ever doing a book club in your company, and please, like if it's a book club of 5 people, I just can't make good on this promise. But if it's a larger book club and if you want to do a Q&A session or something, I'm very happy to join for a Q&A session in your book club to be able to just talk talk about product diseases and how you can introduce some of these ideas. So that's an offer I'll make out there.
That's a great offer. Thanks.
But so that's one concept, like having such a book club. The second is being able to talk about this in a preventative way, that you can't really say that we have these diseases per se. Sometimes you just have to say we want to avoid these diseases. And then the third thing that I've seen, a friend of mine was following this Icelandic tradition where in Iceland there's this tradition of giving a book as a Christmas present. And then everyone reads books on Christmas Eve in this very cozy setting. I think it's adorable.
That's cute.
And
I like
we've implemented that now in our household. But in any case, what she ended up doing was giving the book to her manager and two other people. And then it took off from there, right? I don't know. These are just a few ideas. And plus, I've given you the suggestion as well of introducing this without any pressure, where you just have vision versus survival drawn up. And that sort of begs the next set of questions. Those are some ideas.
Yeah, okay, that's really smart. Thank you. And I want to just give everybody the chance to jump in with any questions that you might have. Jump into the Q&A and drop them there. But I know that you're working on a second book. Do you want to talk us through what it is that you're working on there?
Yeah, so I am super excited about my next book. The working title right now is Radically Rethinking Metrics, the case against targets and OKRs and what to do instead. So the book is about the fact that over many years, I have found that OKRs don't work. And I know this is the most blasphemous thing I could say on this webinar, but truly, and in chat, by the way, you are welcome to share if you've observed some of these things. One thing I've observed with both OKRs and setting targets is that everyone gets into the mode of when you have a target, and you have a product, you're trying to show and prove that, look, I've met whatever target you've set for me. And what that ends up leading to is you end up focusing on how do I frame metrics to show that I've achieved, as opposed to genuinely questioning your metrics and saying, is this working? Is it not? So this sort of, what I've seen is OKRs encourage postmortems because they ask the question, have you or haven't you achieved this goal? Whereas it doesn't encourage the experimentation muscle. What I've seen is that in organizations that are heavy on goals and OKRs, that experimentation muscle has atrophied over time. And so that's what I want to do differently. And so the solution that I talk about in the book is, instead of OKRs, creating OHLs. So OKRs stand for objectives and key results, just in case you're fortunate enough to not have to deal with them. OHLs stand for objectives, hypotheses, and learnings. So this is about creating an environment that has psychological safety, where we define objectives, but objectives are not just arbitrarily set by leadership. It's more like you're framing a puzzle for your team. So you're framing a puzzle, and the objectives is the summary of this puzzle that you've set. And then hypotheses and learnings give you this framework for how do you learn together with your team. And it's 3 questions. How well is it working? What have you learned? And what are you going to do next? And so this is basically the framework, but there's a lot more to it. And how do you transform to be able to grow this experimentation muscle?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense. And Diogo in the chat has said, I think OKRs can work, but it's not for every company, and definitely needs a high level of maturity from product orgs, which I totally agree with. It's the type of thing that if you just have a series of high level goals and broken down into more and more finite things to do, you'll end up with potentially a list of things to do, which isn't going to solve the problem. I love that framing of the OKRs creating post-mortem, but not really helping you decide what you could do about the problem. This is actually really aligned with what we've been doing here at ProdPad as well, which I really love it for that, because we found the same thing. Companies struggle with OKRs, right? It's one thing to set a series of OKRs over here and then go off and you do your product work in another tool over here. And no one actually stops to look back at the objectives that they'd set and whether they're actually making a difference. So what we've done in ProdPad is we've connected the objectives to the hypothesis hypotheses, your initiatives, right? The two are like the flip side of the same coin, which in turn are connected to the experiments, right? What are you actually doing in order to solve this problem? Which of these things have worked and haven't worked? So it very much ties that thinking together. So really excited to see this new book when it comes out, and definitely keep beating that drum about how we can do objective setting better, because I think it's really important.
Okay.
On that note, we're
Looking
just
forward.
about at the end, so I want to wrap up with a couple follow-on points. So for anybody who has been coming along to these things on a regular basis, that we run two different types of these webinars. So some of them are these firesides like we've run here today, and other ones are deep dives into product management best practices. So we're going to be talking about how to build and manage AI products and features. So save this date. It's going to be, I'm trying to zoom in here to see. Maybe somebody else can see that. I know it's coming up. April 29th. There we go. So same time, same place. Come back and see us here. And in the meantime, if anybody wants to jump in and give ProdPad a go, we have a demo environment that we can show off to you. But also we can make sure that you get a chance to see how it's going to work with your processes and your way of working. If you've got questions about how OKRs work or, how to set a vision, that's all within ProdPad, and we'll be happy to show that off. But in the meantime, I want to say a huge thank you, Radhika, for coming along and sharing your insights, your really specific examples. This is the stuff that's absolute magic that allows us to really learn together. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure,
I'm
Janna.
so glad we did this. This has been fantastic. And I look forward to next chance we get a chance to share. And best of luck with that new book. Let us know as soon as that's out.
Thank you. I will.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.